Not that silk, the pearl grey. The white washes her out, and we cannot have the bride looking like a convalescent at her own betrothal. The Dowager Duchess of Hartfield said it without looking at the bride at all. She said it to the modiste, over the bride's head, the way one settles the hanging of a picture. And take in the waist another half-inch. She slouches when she is nervous, and I will not have her slouching on Thursday. Sophia Caro stood on the modest stool with pins along her ribs and said nothing, because she had learned in 3 weeks at Hartfield Court that her opinions were treated as weather, noted, occasionally, never consulted. She kept her eyes on the long window and the wet green park beyond it, and she did not slouch. She had, that morning, before the maid came to dress her, posted a letter to her late father's solicitor in a hand so steady the seal had taken the wax without a smear. No one in the house knew she had written it. That was the point. The flowers, the dowager went on, ticking the air with one gloved finger, the ring of household keys at her waist chiming as she moved. White lilies, banks of them. Lilies last, and they do not drop their petals on the floor for the footman to sweep. None of those wild little things you keep about you, Miss Caro. Myrtle, is it? Common as a hedge. We are not marrying you out of a hedge. My mother grew myrtle, Sophia said. It was the first thing she had said in an hour. Your mother, said the dowager, is not arranging this wedding. A footman opened the door. Your Grace, the Duke of Thornbury is arrived. He says he was invited to the shooting. For the first time that morning the dowager went still, and the keys at her waist fell silent, and Sophia, who missed very little, having spent 3 weeks with nothing to do but watch, saw the older woman's mouth tighten as though she had bitten something sour. He was not invited to anything, the dowager said. Crispin's father invited him to shoot here once, 11 years ago, and the man has decided it is a standing arrangement. Show him to the morning room and tell him my son is not yet down. But he was already in the doorway. Sophia turned on the stool and met the eyes of the man the Dowager Duchess could not control, and that, though she did not yet know to call it that, was the first thing that happened to her at Hartfield Court that the dowager had not arranged. He was tall and not young, dark going grey at one temple, and he stood with the particular stillness of a man who has trained himself not to favour a bad leg. He did not look at the half-pinned gown. He did not look at the silk or the waist or the slouch the dowager had promised. He looked at Sophia's face, directly, the way no one in that house had looked at her since she came, and he inclined his head a precise degree. Miss Caro, he said, as though they had already been introduced, which they had not. His voice was low, and she found, oddly, that she had the sense of having heard it before. Forgive the intrusion. I'll wait on the Duke. His gaze dropped, once to her side, where a bead of red had welled at her ribs, a pin gone too deep through the muslin, and back to her eyes. You're bleeding, and the woman pinning you hasn't noticed, and you haven't said a word. I find that interesting. Then he was gone down the corridor, unhurried, with the faint hitch in his stride, and the modiste gasped and dabbed at the pin. And the dowager said something cold about presumptuous men who forced themselves on grieving houses, and Sophia stood very still on her stool and thought, he is the only person here who has looked at me and not at the dress. She did not yet know what she would do with that thought. But she had begun, that morning, to do something, and now there was a second thing, and 2 things are a beginning. The shooting party gave her 3 more days of being furnished into rooms. She was placed at dinner at the dowager's right hand, where I can see you, my dear, below the family salt, in a seat chosen so that she faced the portrait of the late Duke, and could be reminded, the dowager said sweetly, of the dignity she was marrying into. Her betrothed sat across, and 4 places down, and the truth of Crispin Vaught, Duke of Hartfield, was that he was not cruel and not unkind, and not anything at all, a soft, fair young man of 26, who looked at his mother before he answered any question put to him, including, Sophia had noticed, whether he cared for soup. It was the Duke of Thornbury, Adrian, she had heard a footman call him, when no one was meant to be listening, who would not be seated where he was put. He came late, he left early, and on the second night he found her in the long gallery after the others had gone through to cards, standing before a window with the dark park behind it, alone for the first time in 3 weeks. "You do that very well," he said. She did not turn. "Do what? Your Grace? Disappear in a lit room. I watched you do it through the whole of dinner. You sit where she puts you, you eat what she serves, you let her choose the words out of your mouth, and you are not there at all. You are a very good piece of furniture, Miss Caro." He let that land. "I wonder how long you practiced." It struck deeper than he could have known, and she turned to let him see that it had, because she was tired, suddenly, of letting nothing show. "Since I was orphaned and rich at 21, she said, and discovered that a woman with £45,000 and no living man to stand in front of her is not a person, Your Grace. She is a sum. Everyone in my life since has been arranging me. You are merely the first to say so to my face, and you have said it as an insult." She lifted her chin. "Why are you here? You loathe this house. The Duchess loathes you. You force your way into a shooting party you were not asked to, and you spend it watching a woman you have never met be pinned and seated and silenced. I should like to know why before I decide whether to be afraid of you." Something moved behind his eyes, not the wounding amusement of a moment before, but something older and harder. "Because I have watched her do this once already," he said, "to a girl who could not practice it as well as you, and I buried that girl 4 years ago." He bowed, abruptly, as though he had said more than he meant. "Good night, Miss Caro. Mind your ribs." He left her there, and for the first time since she had come to Hartfield Court, Sophia did not feel arranged. She felt seen and warned, and she did not sleep, and in the dark she took her mother's prayer book from beneath her pillow and ran her thumb over the pressed sprig of myrtle inside the cover until the candle guttered. He should not have found her in the conservatory 2 days later, and she should not have let him stay. It was the one room at Hartfield Court the Dowager had given over entirely to the wedding. Banks of white lilies forced in the heat, rank on rank of them, their scent so heavy in the glass house it sat on the chest like a hand. Sophia had come there to be away from people, and found instead that the lilies were worse than people. They were perfect and identical, and bred to drop nothing, and standing among them she understood with sudden cold clarity exactly what she was meant to be on Thursday. "They have no smell at all, do they?" said Adrian from the doorway. "The way she grows them. Forced too fast. All show, no scent." He came in. He should not have. The rule against it stood between them as real as the glass. My sister loved a garden, a real one, the kind with weeds in it and bees and things that die. Eveline, he said the name carefully, as though it were sharp. She was to marry the present Duke 5 years ago. His mother chose her gown, her flowers, her seat, chose the very words of her acceptance and made her say them at a dinner of 200. By the time I came home from Spain, there was nothing left of my sister but a girl who flinched when a door closed, and within the year she was dead of a fever she had no strength to fight. The physicians called it a decline. I call it what it was. He looked at the lilies, not at Sophia. I came here because I read the announcement, and I saw the same gown going on to the same girl. And I could not let it happen twice in the same house and do nothing, even to a stranger, even to a sum. Sophia's heart was going hard. He was close now, close enough that she could see the grey at his temple and the small white scar at his jaw. and the air in the glass house had gone thin and strange. "I am not your sister, your Grace," she said low. "I do not intend to die of it." "No." His eyes came back to her face. "No, I begin to think you do not." And he reached out, not to take her hand, he was too careful for that. The breach of it too great, but to lift, between one finger and his thumb, the small dull sprig she wore pinned beneath her fichu where the dowager could not see it. "The myrtle. You wear it where she can't take it from you," he said softly, wonderingly, and they were a hand's breadth apart, and the lilies stood around them like white witnesses. And the not touching had become the loudest thing in the room. The conservatory door opened on the chime of keys. Miss Caro. The Dowager Duchess stood in the doorway, lorgnette raised, inspecting them through it as through a window in a shop. "The settlement papers have come from the lawyers. My son's man and mine will want your signature in the library before tea." Her pale eyes moved from Sophia to Adrian and back, and did not heat at all. That was the most frightening thing about her, that even now she did not raise her voice. "Your Grace of Thornbury, the shooting is ended, and so is your welcome. The carriage is at the door. Do not make me have you put in it." Adrian held Sophia's eyes one more moment, then he let the myrtle fall back against her throat, and bowed to the dowager with a courtesy so deep it was its own insult, and walked out past her with his careful, level stride. "Such a tragic man," the dowager said, watching him go, "and such a tedious grudge. Come, my dear, sign your papers, then we shall see about your hair." Sophia did not sign them. She took the settlement to her room on the pretext of a headache, and she read it through twice by candlelight, and the second time she read it the floor of 3 weeks' patience dropped out from under her. She was numerate. Her father had taught her, against the advice of everyone he knew, to keep his books, and a girl who can keep books can read a deed. And what was written in this one, under the courtly Latin and the lawyer's hand, was very simple. Her £45,000, the whole of it, the principal and the lands at Carrow Park and the rents thereof, was to pass on her marriage entire into the control of the Duke of Hartfield. Not 1 farthing was reserved to her separate use. Not a pin money clause, not a jointure properly secured, not a trustee standing between her fortune and her husband's creditors. By the law of the land, a wife owned nothing her husband did not let her own, that she had always known. But a careful settlement could carve out a separate estate, hold a woman's money in trust beyond her husband's reach, make her something other than a purse with a wedding ring. This settlement carved out nothing. It was not a marriage contract. It was a conveyance, and the property being conveyed was Sophia Caro. And it answered, all at once, every cold, strange thing about Hartfield Court. The economies in a ducal house, the unmended roof on the east wing, the way the dowager spoke of Thursday not as a wedding, but as a deadline. She rose and went to the library when the house was asleep, and by the embers and 1 candle she found in the estate ledgers what she had begun to suspect. The late Duke had mortgaged Hartfield to the chimney pots in some great failed venture, canals or colonies. It scarcely mattered which, and his widow had spent 6 years holding the creditors off by iron economy and the promise of a great marriage to come. Sophia was not the bride, she was the rescue. £45,000 of ready capital, walking into the house on its own 2 feet to save it, and grateful and silent and pinned. She understood then what Adrian had meant about his sister. Eveline had not had £45,000, she had had connection and a great name, and that marriage had been about something else. Pride, alliance, the dowager's appetite for arrangement for its own sake. But it was the same hand, the same gown, the same lilies, the same seat below the salt where she could be watched. The Dowager Duchess did not crush brides for their money alone. She crushed them because a bride with a will of her own was a variable. and the dowager had spent her life learning that variables were the thing that destroyed houses. She had been married off herself. Once to a weak man who had ruined them, she had saved what was left with her own hands by allowing nothing and no one to be uncertain ever again. Sophia could almost have pitied her if the woman had not been standing on her neck. She did not weep. She sat in the cold library with the ledger open and the truth plain, and she felt something she had not felt in 3 weeks, which was the return of her own mind to her own use. Then she took a fresh sheet of the Duke's own paper, and she wrote a second letter to her solicitor, longer than the first, and in it she gave him instructions. Adrian came back the next afternoon, openly, in defiance of the carriage and the warning, and he found her, because she had let it be known to one trustworthy groom where she walked, at the stile between the Hartfield Park and the Thornbury land, which adjoined it, the 2 great estates lying side by side as they had for 200 years. "You came back," she said. "You knew I would. You sent the boy to tell me where you'd be." He almost smiled. "You are not nearly as much furniture as you pretend, Miss Carrow." No. She turned to him, and she told him all of it: the settlement, the conveyance, the mortgage, the rescue she was meant to be, in the flat, clear voice of a woman reading her own accounts aloud. And she watched the fury come up in him, slow and terrible. And when she had finished, he was already turning toward the house as though he would walk into it and take the dowager apart stone by stone. "I will end this," he said. "Today, I'll have my solicitor and yours. I'll lay the mortgage and that settlement in front of every man at your father's club. I'll see that woman cut by every hostess in, Your Grace." Sophia put herself in front of him, one hand flat against his chest, and the touch stopped him, as her words alone might not have. "Stop. I do not need you to ride into that house and save me. I am not Eveline. If you fight this for me, then I am only furniture that has changed owners, yours instead of hers, and the whole county will say the heiress was carried off by one duke from another like a parcel redirected, and they will be right." Her hand pressed once, hard. "I do not need rescuing. I need you to stand beside me while I save myself. There is a difference, and it is the only difference in the world that matters to me now. Will you do that? Will you let me do it?" He looked down at her, and the fury went out of his face, and something else came into it, something that made her breath catch worse than the lilies had. "Tell me the plan," he said. "Not your plan for the wedding. Yours," so she told him, and in the telling of it she watched a man who had failed to save one girl 4 years ago understand that the second girl did not want saving, wanted instead a witness, an ally, a hand to hold at the end of her own road, and she watched him decide that this, of the two, was the harder and the better thing to give. "There is a condition," she said when it was nearly done, "and it is not a small one. My fortune. I am settling it, the whole of it, on myself, to my own separate use, in trust, where no husband alive can touch it. If I am ever to be a wife again, it will be to a man who knows, going in, that he gets the woman and not a shilling of the money. I will not be rescued into a second conveyance, not even a kind one. So you should know, Adrian, before this goes one step further, exactly how little I am worth to the man who takes me." She made herself say it plainly, the way he had once said a cruel thing plainly to her, in a gallery. "Nothing, I am worth nothing to him. That is the whole of my dowry. Knowing it, do you still want to be standing beside me on Thursday?" It was the first time she had used his name, and it landed between them like the thunderclap the rules promised it would. "Sophia," he said, and her name in his low voice undid the last pinned thing in her. "I came to this house to save a stranger out of grief for my sister. I am going to leave it having found the only woman I have ever met who would rather be poor and her own than rich and arranged." He took her hand, at last, in both of his, the rule broken and gone and not mourned. Keep your £45,000. Keep all of it, to the last farthing, where I can never reach it. I want the part of you that woman has been trying to pin down for 3 weeks. And I have wanted it since you stood on that stool and bled and would not cry out. Stand beside me. I'll stand beside you. Let her keep the lilies. She made her choice in the open 3 days before the ball, and she made it where it could not be unmade. She went to Crispin first, alone, because whatever he was not the architect of it. And she found him in the gun room cleaning a fowling piece he never fired, hiding from his own house. Your Grace, she said, I am not going to marry you. He looked up, and to her surprise the first thing that crossed his soft young face was not anger, but a flicker of something that might have been relief, quickly hidden. She'll never allow it, he said. You don't know I know exactly what she is. I have read the settlement, Crispin. I know the mortgage, and the venture, and what I was for. She watched him flush. You knew too. I didn't choose it. It came out of him low and wretched. I have never chosen anything. She chose Evelyn. She chose you. She chooses my coats. He set the gun down. I am sorry. For you and for Eveline, whom I liked, God help me, before there was nothing left of her to like. But I cannot stop her. No one can stop her. She is the only reason there is still a roof. Someone is going to stop her, Sophia said. On Thursday. I should like you to be in the room when it happens, because I think you have wanted, your whole life, to watch someone do it, and not be punished for it. And she left him there with the unfired gun, and went to find the Dowager, and told her, to her face, in the library where the unsigned settlement still lay, that there would be no signature and no wedding. The Dowager did not raise her voice. She never raised her voice. That was Sophia's second move, and the Dowager's first. You foolish girl, she said almost gently, setting down her lorgnette. Do you imagine you can simply decline? The announcement is in every paper in London. 200 people come on Thursday. If you cry off now, you are a jilt. Worse, a jilt who has been seen twice alone with the Duke of Thornbury, in my gallery and my conservatory, by my servants, who will say what I tell them to say. I will not have to lift a finger, child. I will only have to be sorrowful. By Friday you will be a woman no respectable house in England will receive, and your precious £45,000 will buy you a cottage and a cat and nothing else. Because money cannot purchase back a name. She smiled, and it was worse than fury. Sign the papers. Marry my son. Be a duchess and be dull and be safe. Or defy me and be ruined by Saturday. Those are the only 2 doors, and I have the keys to both. And the dreadful thing was that by every rule of the world they both lived in, she was right. They took the myrtle from her that night. Sophia woke to find her room turned out, the Dowager's maids, on the Dowager's order, tidying for the move to the bridal apartments, and her mother's prayer book gone with everything else into a trunk she was not given the key to. And when she demanded it back, the housekeeper said, expressionless, that her Grace had ordered all common rubbish disposed of, and that a sprig of dead weed had been swept into the kitchen fire that morning with the rest. It should have been a small thing. It was not. Sophia stood in the stripped room and felt the 4 years of Eveline and the 3 weeks of herself rise up at once, and for 1 hour, the worst hour, she believed the woman had won. Because a name was a name, and ruin was ruin, and her mother's myrtle was ash on a kitchen hearth. And she was alone in a house where every door had 2 keys, and the Dowager held them both. She did not get the prayer book back. Some things, once burned, do not come again. But in the grey before dawn, dry-eyed and steady at last, she dressed without ringing for anyone, and she walked out of Hartfield Court on her own 2 feet through the servants' door, and she did not come back for 3 days, and she let the whole house believe what the Dowager told them, that the bride was indisposed, resting overcome, and would be radiant on Thursday. She was at Thornbury, and at her solicitor's, and at the small church on the Thornbury land where the banns had quietly been read for 3 Sundays to a congregation too countrified to gossip to London. And on the morning of the ball, in the conservatory at Thornbury, a real one, with bees in it, and weeds, and things permitted to die, Adrian cut, with his own hands, a living branch of myrtle from a bush his sister Eveline had planted there as a girl, and gave it to her, and said nothing, because nothing needed saying. The ball was everything the Dowager Duchess had arranged. The white lilies stood in banks the length of the great saloon at Hartfield Court, scentless and perfect. The orchestra played what she had chosen. 200 of the first people in England moved beneath the chandeliers she had ordered lit, and the place cards on the supper tables were lettered in her own hand, and at the head of it all stood the Dowager in silver grey, serene, the keys gone from her waist tonight in favour of diamonds, waiting to present her son, and the bride whose fortune would mend the roof, the bride who was, as far as the room knew, dressing upstairs in the pearl grey silk with the waist taken in. At 10:30 the doors at the far end opened and were announced, and the name the footman called was not the bride's. His Grace the Duke of Thornbury, Her Grace the Duchess of Thornbury. Sophia came in on Adrian's arm. She wore white after all, but not the convalescence white the Dowager had feared. A deep clean ivory that suited her exactly, chosen by no one but herself, and she carried not lilies, but a loose living spray of myrtle, green and small and alive, and on her bare hand was a ring no one in that house had put there. She was not the affianced of the Duke of Hartfield. She had married the Duke of Thornbury that morning in the small church on his own land, before God and a country parson and a register that would be in every paper by Monday, and her £45,000 were locked in a trust to her own separate use, where neither Duke nor creditor nor mother would touch a farthing of it as long as she lived. The room understood before the mother did. That was the thing Sophia would remember all her life. The way the knowledge moved through 200 people like wine through a field, the heads turning, the fans stopping, the silence rolling up the saloon toward the silver-grey figure at its head, who went on smiling at the doorway, expecting her son's bride for whole seconds after every other soul in the room had grasped that the bride was already a duchess, and not of this house. Your Grace. Sophia crossed the length of the saloon to her, through the lilies, on her husband's arm, and she did not lower her voice, because the Dowager never lowered hers, and Sophia had learned from a master. You chose my dress. You chose my flowers. You chose the seat where I should sit so that you could watch me. You arranged every particular of this evening with your own hand, and it is, I confess, the most beautiful ball I have ever seen. She let the room hold its breath. You arranged everything, Your Grace, everything except the bride. That, it seems, was the one thing you forgot to keep a key to. The Dowager's face did not crack so much as empty. You are ruined, she said, but her voice had lost its terrible quiet at last. It had gone thin. Seen alone with him, married in a hedge church. You little, I am the Duchess of Thornbury, Sophia said, married in the sight of God, and the county with the banns read 3 Sundays. And there is not a hostess in this room who will cut a duchess to please the woman who tried to convey an heiress like a parcel of land to pay her dead husband's mortgage. She turned, unhurried, to the company, to the great patroness, Lady Castleton, whose verdict was social law, and who stood not 10 feet off with her lorgnette frozen halfway to her eye, and inclined her head. Lady Castleton. The settlement that woman pressed on me reserved to me nothing, not a shilling, not a separate penny, because Hartfield is mortgaged past its chimneys, and I was the cargo sent to float it. There are 4 other heiresses promised to her acquaintance this season. You will know what to do with that knowledge better than I. and she said no more, because she did not need to. She had laid one true thing in front of the one person whose word could end a reign, and let it do its work. Exactly as a knife laid on a table does its work without being lifted. Lady Castleton lowered her lorgnette and looked at the Dowager Duchess of Hartfield the way one looks at a tradesman who is overcharged, and turned her shoulder, and that turned shoulder in that room before those 200 was the sound of a kingdom falling. Adrian had not said a word. He had only stood beside her, as he had promised, his bad leg steady under him, and watched his wife do the thing he had 4 years ago been unable to do for his sister, and the look on his face was not triumph, but something nearer to grief finally allowed to set down its weight. Across the room, by the cold hearth, young Crispin Vaught, Duke of Hartfield, watched his mother's empire come apart in the space of a country dance, and on his soft face, for the first time in his life, was something that looked very much like a man waking up. It was Adrian who took her out of it, when it was done, onto the terrace under a sky scraped clear of cloud. The same cold, clear sky, she thought, as the first night he had told her she did very good furniture. "You did it," he said. "I only stood there." "You stood there," she said. "Do you know how long I have wanted someone to simply stand there and let me?" And she turned in the circle of the open terrace doors, in the light and the music and full view of anyone who cared to look, and she kissed her husband first, and on purpose, choosing it, the last pin pulled out at last. And the myrtle in her hand was crushed between them, and gave up finally its small green living scent, which was nothing at all like the lilies. They planted the myrtle at Thornbury, a slip off the spray, in the real garden where Eveline's bush still grew, and it took, as myrtle does when it is wanted. The Dowager Duchess of Hartfield did not appear in London the following season, nor the one after. Cut by Lady Castleton and the 4 families whose daughters she had marked, she retired to the dower house at the edge of the mortgaged estate and arranged, the report came back, the seating of her own dinners for one. The mortgage was met in the end by the quiet sale of the London house, and a marriage Crispin made the next year. A parson's daughter of no fortune and great kindness, chosen by no one but himself, the first thing he had ever chosen, and Sophia, who stood up with the bride, thought the boy looked 10 years younger for having done one ungoverned thing before he died. On a bright morning a year after the ball, Adrian found his wife on the terrace at Thornbury, with the household accounts open before her. She kept the books herself, as her father had taught her, and the trust to her separate use had grown a little, being shrewdly handled by a woman who had read a deed once and never forgot how. There was myrtle in a glass at her elbow, cut that morning, dropping its small leaves freely on the table where no one had forbidden it. "You're scattering petals on the cloth," he said, for the footman to sweep, and she heard the old cold voice underneath his teasing and laughed. "Let them lie," said the Duchess of Thornbury, and put out her hand for his, the one with no ring of keys at the waist above it and no one's choosing in it at all, and the morning was hers, and so was the man, and so, for the first time in her life, was she.